All right, AP Environmental Science, Mr. Trappier here. We are going to continue today with Unit 5. I know Unit 5 is a big one. But we're getting closer. We're getting closer to the end. There's just so much stuff in this unit that we have to get through. So I really would like, possibly by the end of next week, to be totally done with Unit 5 and ready to move into Unit 6. So again, I've really been skipping around a lot with a lot of the topics. They don't flow very well as far as the way that they kind of present them from the College Board. So again, I'm kind of skipping around a little bit to kind of make a little bit more sense out of this and try to give you guys the best shot at learning the material. So we've been talking a lot about the Green Revolution, right? All these different techniques that have helped us produce food for 7.8 billion people and growing. One of the big things that we really have to focus on, I think, as a planet is, if we're going to feed all these people and we want to grow food, we want to do it in a way that's not going to damage our soil. This term here, soil degradation, it basically refers to just kind of ruining the soil, kind of declining or kind of causing the quality of the soil to just degrade and decline over time. And that basically happens with overuse as well as some specific agricultural practices that we apply. Now, I did the other day talk about irrigation and how over irrigating our crops, which eventually they grow in the soil, leads to things like waterlogging and salinization. So this is one way that we degrade our soil, just through the processes of irrigating. So I'm not going to talk about that one today. I discussed it in the previous lecture. So make sure you go back and look over that if you don't know what waterlogging is or salinization. Those are important things, but they do lead to soil degradation. Now, the two I want to talk about today are what we call plowing and tilling, and another process called slash and burn farming or slash and burn agriculture. Let's talk about plowing and tilling first. Plowing and tilling, these are kind of interchangeable words. They usually just use the word tilling, but whatever, it's fairly similar. These processes basically turn the soil, they turn especially those upper layers of the soil, the O and the A horizon, they basically turn them upside down using tools. This picture here is kind of showing us this process. This machine here, this tractor, has these kind of blades. They're kind of these curved blades, and they just kind of flip the soil upside down. Now, some of the problems with this, and by the way, we do that, every time, we harvest crops and we're ready to replant things. We want to till that soil to kind of loosen it up a little bit before we plant the seeds. Now, one of the big issues with that is when we loosen the soil, it makes the soil very susceptible to erosion, especially wind and water erosion. And if that soil is going to erode, I mean, just going to just be drifting away, we're going to be removing those layers, those O and those A horizons, which are the most fertile layers of our soil. So, we don't want to degrade our soil by causing it to erode away. Another big problem with tilling the soil is within the soil, especially in the A horizon, there's a lot of carbon dioxide that gets sequestered, it gets stored. And that's because, remember, plants respirate. So when plants respirate, and they do this mainly at their roots, they release carbon dioxide gas into the environment. And a lot of that CO2 gets kind of trapped in the soil. So when we turn the soil upside down, we're actually releasing that sequestered, that stored carbon into the atmosphere, right? And that's a greenhouse gas. And if that goes up into the air, that is not good. global warming, climate change, heating of the planet, all those bad things. Okay, so believe it or not, just our practices of farming, tilling soil, is actually causing our planet to warm because we're putting all of that sequestered CO2 up into the air. In addition to that, just running the farm equipment, gives off carbon dioxide emissions, right? Because they run on fossil fuels. So there's another way that we can, release CO2 into the air. Another problem with turning the soil upside down is a lot of times, especially in that A horizon, there's a lot of excess fertilizers. Remember, we're kind of guilty of like over fertilizing a lot of times, especially with our synthetic fertilizers. A lot of the synthetic fertilizers that we apply, I can't remember what the percentage is, but there's a good chunk of that, a good percentage that don't even get absorbed by plants. So they just kind of linger there in the A horizon, in that soil layer. So if we turn that soil upside down, we're going to bring those excess fertilizers to the surface. And again, they can just be carried away by the wind or carried away, by water. And that could lead to runoff problems and lead to eutrophication problems if those fertilizers get put into rivers and lakes and ponds and things like that. So these are all really big issues with tilling. We really want to minimize that as much as possible. But again, we got to feed 7.8 billion people. So I want us to understand a little bit about this, that this process of plowing and tilling, it's an extremely common process in the developed world, okay, in the United States, for example. The thing is this sustainable? I mean, can we continue, to constantly turn our soil over in order to grow food? I don't think it is, because if we do that, we're causing a lot of environmental problems, and one of them is soil degradation, amongst other things. So, this is probably something that we need to really look at and say that we have to either minimize it or find some alternative way to grow food, because this really isn't very sustainable. All right, now slash and burn. Slash and burn agriculture is done in the developing world. This is not a practice that's common in the developed world. Especially, this is done in tropical regions, in the tropics. Now, the reason why growing crops in the tropics is difficult, it's a challenge. It's mainly because of the soil quality. In the tropics, like tropical rainforest, for example, the soil is just not very fertile. It's not uh, arable, which means it's not very good for growing crops. It's just very nutrient poor. So, in order to, if you're a farmer, in the tropics and you need to grow food, I mean, people need to do that. What they basically do is they burn down the forests. When they burn down the forests, all of those dead trees, they get converted into ash. Ash is basically very rich in carbon, it's rich in nutrients, and they basically use it as sort of a natural fertilizer. And then they can grow crops in the soil. So the idea here is that they take an intact forest, like the tropics and the tropical rainforest. They cut it down, they burn it first, and then they apply all of that to the soil, and then they can grow crops. The thing is, it's only good for a certain amount of time, because once they harvest those crops, then the soil is infertile again. So then what do they have to do? They gotta, grow, they gotta cut down more forests, burn more forests. So this is really leading to a lot of deforestation problems. They're actually cutting down, a huge amount of forested land just so they can get fertile soil. So it's kind of an issue. These are the regions around the world where this mainly happens. And I think this is important. Sometimes they'll ask a geography question. Hold on. Hey, Harrison, can you go close that door for me over there? Sorry. They'll sometimes ask an AP question about geography, and they'll say, where globally would you find um, slash and burn agriculture? And these are the regions where you would find this, because this is where you find tropical rainforests, right? Lots of tropical rainforests in the Amazon. This is the northern part of South America, Central Africa. Lots of tropical rainforests here. Up here, the northern Africa is a lot of desert, but the central part is a lot of tropics. In Indonesia, lots of areas over here where you see lots of tropics. So this is where you see a lot of slash and burn. The big benefit with slash and burn is it allows people to farm on land that isn't arable. It's not really good for farming. Some problems with it: when they burn rainforests, just like if you burn any forest, it is going to release a tremendous amount of CO2. So we don't want to be like setting deliberate forest fires, because that's going to increase greenhouse gas emissions. Tons of habitat loss, tons of deforestation. Um, this is kind of a this one here is kind of linked, I suppose, to the first bullet. But if they're not careful, if these people that are doing this, and you got to remember, these are mainly just the people that live in these areas, kind of the natives to these regions. If these forest fires get out of control, that can be a really big problem. Then you're talking about maybe hundreds and hundreds of square miles of rainforest that's being burned. So these accidental forest fires can really break out if they're not careful. All right, now the last thing I want to talk about today is what we call sustainable agriculture. So, what are some things that we can do that aren't going to damage the planet so much? And the main goal of any sustainable agricultural practice should be conserving our soil. So, here's the big question, right? I mean, how can we feed the world without degrading all of our soil? We only have so much arable land on this planet, and if we ruin it all, we're not going to have anything to grow, all right, or any soil to grow things in. Now, this is a list of 6 different practices. I'm just going to briefly explain each one of these. But these are all agricultural methods, but they're all sustainable things. They're all things that we can do to kind of help reduce soil erosion. And that's kind of the big thing that we have to sort of look at. So let's kind of just go through these one at a time. All right, no-till agriculture. I mean, that's exactly what it says it is. Just less tilling. If possible, no tilling, but that's kind of difficult. But just kind of being mindful of not tilling the soil so much, that leads to less soil erosion. One problem with that is it usually leads to more pests, especially weeds. So if you're not going to till, if you're not going to turn your soil over, that usually means you're probably going to be spending a lot more money on pesticides. But again, there's pros, there's cons. This is called contour plowing. Contour plowing is basically, if you look at the picture, and instead of just kind of like growing your crops in straight rows or whatever, instead they kind of use the natural contour of the land, the natural curvature of the land to plant their rows of crops. And this does actually minimize soil erosion, especially water erosion by rain and things like that. So that's something that we can do. This one here is called terracing. This is only done in like mountainous areas. See, what they do here is they kind of cut strips like this, kind of almost like steps, like kind of like steps on the mountain. But this is not natural. They actually kind of cut this out, and they'll plant their rows of crops on each one of these steps. And they can plant different crops if they want to on each step. Again, by doing this, it does help limit erosion, especially by rain. You imagine if it rains on, let's say, a hill or a mountain, that water is just going to travel straight down the slope of the mountain. But by putting these steps in place, the water is going to land on a flat spot instead of a sloped spot. So it really does help limit any type of soil erosion by water. So this would be a good thing, especially in mountainous areas. This is called strip cropping. Strip cropping is a little bit like contour plowing, how they kind of use the natural contour of the land. But in this case, what they do is they'll plant multiple crops, not just one. And the idea here is that multiple crops have different depths to their roots. For example, here they're growing oats, they're growing soybeans, and they're growing maize, which is corn. And each one of those crops has a different depth to its root system. So if they harvest, let's say, oats, all right, which has a kind of a shallow root system, the other two crops are still holding the soil in place because their root systems are much deeper. Maybe a couple of months later, they'll harvest the soybeans. But by that time, the oats may have grown back. So again, what they're doing is they're kind of just harvesting different crops at different times. That doesn't degrade the soil as quickly. The problem with this is you're growing multiple crops. You need multiple pieces of equipment, maybe multiple types of pesticides and chemicals. So that could get kind of expensive after a while. So that's one downfall to that. This one here, I think, is one that I think could really be beneficial if we really think about it. This is called windbreaking or windbreaks. And if you look at this picture, for example, like say right in here where my cursor is, here you have like multiple rows of crops, whatever they're growing, could be soybeans or whatever. But you'll notice like right around it, they planted rows of trees. These are trees. And those trees are there to just break the wind. So it really stops any type of wind erosion from the soil. I think this makes a lot of sense. It might take some manpower, it might take some time for those trees to all grow, but you can see how this entire area is probably kept free of any type of wind erosion, all because those natural windbreaks caused by those trees. So this one here, I think, is a very doable thing. Finally, perennial crops. I want to make sure you guys know the difference between an annual crop and a perennial. Annual crops are crops that typically live one season, and they have to be harvested and then replanted again. Whereas a perennial crop, these are things that can live multiple seasons. So you can like harvest the crop, but you don't have to replant it again. The problem with our modern day agriculture is a lot of our cash crops, like corn, for example, it's an annual. So like, you plant your corn, you let it grow, you got to harvest it, and then you got to replant it again. All right, so that means you got to till the soil again, right? So, if our cash crops, if the things that we grow are perennials, then there's probably a lot less soil damage that we would be doing. There's been a lot of research done on genetically engineering, our annual crops to make them perennial crops. If that ever comes to fruition, and maybe it has, I haven't done a lot of research on it, but maybe you guys can do some research on your own to see how we're doing this. But maybe there will come a day where you don't have to replant corn every single summer, or you don't have to replant soybeans all the time. Maybe these are things that will just continuously grow, even after you harvest them. But again, that's something to look at. All right, guys, that's it for me for today. Make sure you check your Buzz agenda for any homework, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.